A man stood in the rain outside a hotel he had paid for down to the last brass screw, and a stranger inside decided he didn't look like the kind of person who belonged there. He was holding his sleeping daughter against his chest. Her shoes were soaked. So were his. He had a worn canvas jacket, jeans gone dark at the knees from the weather, and a face that said he had been driving for hours. When he walked through the doors and asked for a room, the young man behind the desk barely looked up before deciding the answer. 11 minutes later, that same young man checked in a stranger off the street with no reservation and a smile that could have lit the whole lobby. By the time the night was over, 2 people would lose their jobs. Where they stood, in front of every guest still awake to see it, and not one of them had any idea that the soaked, tired man they had tried to push back out into the storm held the deed to the building over their heads. If you have ever stood somewhere and felt the room quietly decide you weren't good enough for it, before you opened your mouth, before you did a single thing, then stay with me. This one is going to land, and it ends in a way nobody in that lobby saw coming. Andre Caldwell had not meant to stop here at all. He had spent the whole day 3 counties over, in a town most people drove past without slowing down, standing in a small cemetery on a hill where his mother had been buried 6 years to the day. He went every year on the same date. He brought the same flowers, the cheap yellow ones, from the grocery store, because those were the ones she had liked when she could not afford better, and kept liking even after her son could buy her any flower in the world. He sat on the grass, and he talked to her for a while, the way you talk to someone you miss more than you let yourself feel most days. Then he wiped his face, put his sunglasses back on, and walked back to the car where his daughter was waiting. Naomi was 7. She had come along because Andre did not like the idea of her growing up not knowing where her grandmother was, even if all she could know was a name on a stone and the stories her father told in the car on the long drive. She had been good all day, patient in the way kids can sometimes surprise you with, and she had picked one of the yellow flowers to keep. It was now pressed flat and slightly crushed inside the front pocket of her little backpack, next to a stuffed fox named Marbles that went everywhere she went. They had started the drive home around 8, and then the weather turned. First a drizzle, then a wall of rain that came down so hard the wipers could barely keep up. Andre slowed to a crawl behind a line of taillights, and somewhere past the second hour, Naomi had finally given up the fight and fallen asleep in her booster seat, one hand still hooked around Marbles. He glanced at her in the mirror and made a decision the way he made most of them, quietly and without saying it out loud to anyone. He was not going to push it another 90 minutes through a storm like this with his daughter asleep in the back. There was a hotel 20 minutes ahead, right off the highway, in the heart of the city. He knew it well. He knew every inch of it, in fact. The Wexford was the flagship of the Caldwell Group, the first true luxury property he had ever built, and the one he was proudest of. He had stood in that lobby before there was a floor, back when it was concrete dust and scaffolding, and he had told the contractor exactly how he wanted the light to fall when guests walked in at night. He had not been by in a while. That was on purpose, too. Andre had a habit that drove his executives a little crazy. He liked to visit his own hotels without telling anyone he was coming, and he liked to do it dressed like he was nobody at all. No fitted suit, no watch worth more than a car. He wore old jeans and a canvas jacket and let the front desk see exactly what they showed everybody else who walked in looking ordinary. He did not do it to play games. He did it because there was only one honest way to find out how a place really treated people, and that was to become one of the people it had no reason to impress. He had learned that lesson young, and he had learned it the hard way. When Andre was 9, his mother worked 2 jobs, and one of them was cleaning rooms at a roadside motel off the interstate. She would come home with her hands cracked from the cheap cleaning chemicals and her feet swollen, and she never once complained where he could hear it. Money was thin that year. There was a stretch of a few weeks when they did not have a steady place to stay, and his mother handled it the way she handled everything, with her chin up and her son's hand in hers. One night, late in the rain, they pulled into a different motel, not the one she cleaned, a cheaper one, and his mother went in to ask about a room while Andre waited in the car and watched through the glass. He could not hear the words. He did not need to. He watched the man behind that desk look his mother up and down, take in her uniform and her tired face, and the boy in the car, and he watched the man shake his head before she had even finished talking. His mother stood there a moment longer. Then she came back to the car, got in, and sat with her hands on the wheel for a long time without driving. She did not cry. She just said, real quiet, almost to herself, "It's all right, baby. We'll find somewhere." They slept in the car that night in a gas station lot, and his mother gave him her coat because the heater barely worked, and she stayed up most of the night so he could sleep. Andre never forgot the look on that man's face. He has chased the opposite of that look for his entire adult life. Every hotel he built, every team he hired, every rule he wrote, all of it came back to one simple idea. When somebody walks in out of the dark, cold and tired and not dressed to impress anybody, the only decent thing to do is treat them like they matter before they have proven a single thing to you. That was the whole reason he was driving toward the Wexford tonight, in the rain, on the anniversary of the day he lost the woman who taught him that. He pulled into the covered drop-off a little before 11. The rain hammered the roof of the portico. He sat for a second, then turned and gently woke Naomi enough to get her arms around his neck, lifting her against his shoulder with marbles squashed between them. She mumbled something and went straight back to sleep. He grabbed nothing else. No bags. They would get those in the morning. He just needed a bed and a roof and his kid breathing next to him in the dark for one night. The door slid open, and the lobby of the Wexford opened up in front of him, and for a second, just a second, it did exactly what he had built it to do. The light was warm and low. Soft piano drifted over from the direction of the bar. The floor was a deep, polished stone that he had argued about with 3 different designers until they got the color right. A handful of guests sat in the lounge chairs near the windows, watching the storm and nursing late drinks. Andre crossed the floor slowly, careful with the weight on his shoulder, and walked up to the long front desk. There was one clerk on duty at this hour, young, maybe 25, with a sharp haircut and a uniform pressed within an inch of its life. The badge on his chest said, "Bryce." He was looking at his monitor when Andre approached, and he kept looking at it for a beat after he clearly knew someone was standing there. Then he looked up, and Andre watched it happen in real time. The eyes went to the wet jacket. The eyes went to the sleeping kid. The eyes went to the worn sneakers leaving little damp prints on the stone. And the whole face changed, not all at once, not loudly, just a small cooling, like a door easing shut. "Evening, Andre?" Andre said, "I need a room for the night. Just one night, 2 of us. Nothing fancy. A standard room is fine." Bryce did not answer right away. He glanced back at his screen, then folded his hands on the counter and leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice in a way that was meant to sound polite but was pitched just loud enough to carry to the people sitting nearby. "Sir," he said, "I think you might be more comfortable somewhere else. We're fairly particular about who we host here. This probably isn't the right fit for you." The words sat there in the air. Andre felt them the way you feel a cold draft from a window you thought was closed. A woman in the lounge 2 chairs over glanced up from her phone. A man near the bar paused with his drink halfway to his mouth. Andre kept his voice level. "I'm not asking for anything special. I have a sleeping child, it's pouring outside, and I'd like a room. Whatever you've got." Bryce did the small practiced thing that people do when they have decided how a conversation is going to end and just want to get there. He gave a little tight smile and said, "Unfortunately, we're completely booked tonight. No availability. I'd recommend checking one of the places out by the highway. They tend to be a better match for, walk-ins." A better match. Andre noted that. He did not react. He had spent a lot of years learning how to keep his face still while his mind moved fast underneath it. He looked at this kid in his crisp uniform, in a building Andre had dreamed into existence, and he thought about that motel man from 30 years ago, and how the look was exactly the same. Not cruel exactly, just certain. Certain that the man in front of him did not count for much. "Nothing at all," Andre said. It was not really a question. "Nothing tonight, sir. Sorry about that." Bryce was already glancing back at his screen, the matter closed in his mind. And then the front doors opened again. A man came in out of the rain, shaking water off an expensive overcoat. He was maybe 50, well-fed, with the easy confidence of someone who had never once been told no in a lobby. He had no luggage either. He walked up to the desk, a few feet down from Andre, and said, loud and breezy, "Tell me you've got something for me. My flight got grounded, and I am not driving anywhere in this." And Andre watched the whole thing turn. Bryce straightened up. The smile came back. The warm one this time. The real one. "Of course, sir. Let me see what we have for you." Fingers moving over the keyboard now, quick and helpful. "Looks like we can get you into a deluxe king on the 8th floor. Beautiful view when the weather clears. Would that work?" Perfect. No reservation, no questions about whether he was the right fit, no suggestion that he try the places out by the highway. Inside of 3 minutes the man had a key card in his hand and a "Welcome to the Wexford, enjoy your stay" sliding off Bryce's tongue like it was the easiest thing in the world. The man tucked the card in his pocket and headed for the elevators, never once realizing he had just walked through a door that had been slammed in the face of the man standing 6 feet away from him. Andre had not moved. He had watched every second of it. He did not say anything, because there was nothing left to say. The thing he had come here suspecting might be true had just played out in front of him in full color, and the only person in that lobby who fully understood what had happened was him. Naomi stirred against his shoulder. Her voice came out small and thick with sleep, muffled into his jacket. "Daddy, are we sleeping here?" He turned his head and pressed his cheek to the top of her hair. "Working on it, baby. Give me a minute." He turned back to the desk. His voice was very calm. People who knew Andre well knew that this particular calm was not the same thing as peace. It was the calm of deep water, the kind that looks still on the surface because whatever is moving underneath has not decided to come up yet. "I want to speak with whoever's running things tonight," he said. Something flickered across Bryce's face. He picked up the desk phone, said a few low words, and hung up. "Someone will be right with you," he said, and the smile was gone again. The manager came out within a couple of minutes. The tag on his lapel said Garrett Pruitt, and he was the sort of man who put on a full suit at 11 at night because in his mind authority was a thing you put on like a jacket. Mid-40s, neat, and already walking like he had been briefed and had already made up his mind. He came around the desk and planted himself next to Bryce, which made the geometry of the thing obvious right away. Two of them lined up behind the counter, and Andre on the other side, alone, holding a sleeping 7-year-old. "Sir," Garrett said, in the smooth tone of a man used to making problems go away, "I understand there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. My colleague tells me we're fully committed for the evening. I'm afraid there's just nothing we can do for you tonight." "There's no misunderstanding," Andre said. "I watched your clerk tell me you were fully booked and then check in a walk-in with no reservation about 90 seconds later, so I'd like you to explain that to me." Garrett's expression hardened just a touch. It was the look of a man who's not used to being questioned by someone he has already filed under unimportant. "Our front desk uses professional discretion about how we accommodate guests. I trust their judgment. I'm going to ask you to respect that." "Professional discretion," Andre repeated. "That's right." For a long moment, Andre said nothing. He looked at this man, at the certainty in his face, that same certainty that had no crack in it anywhere, and he thought about a lot of things at once. He thought about his mother sitting with her hands on the wheel in the rain. He thought about how easy it would be right now to reach into his back pocket, pull out his ID, and watch the color drain out of both their faces. It would feel good. It would feel very good. Part of him wanted it badly. But that was not what mattered, and he knew it. Because if this was happening here, at the Wexford, the property he held up as the standard for everything else he owned, then he needed to see the whole shape of it before he did anything. He needed to know how far it would go if he were really just a tired man in a wet jacket and nobody important at all. He owed that much to every person who would walk through these doors after tonight and not have a deed in their pocket to save them. So he made himself wait. "Can I get your name and your title?" Andre asked. "For my own records." "Garrett Pruitt, Night Operations Manager." He said it flatly, like it cost him something to give it. Andre nodded slowly. He took it in the way he took everything in, without making a show of it. Then he eased back from the counter, found a chair in the lounge near the windows, and sat down with his daughter settled against him. He was not leaving. He just wanted to see what they would do with a man who refused to disappear. He did not have to wait long. Garrett did not go back to the office. He stayed near the desk, arms folded, and every minute or so his eyes drifted over to where Andre sat. Each time the look carried the same flat message. "You are still here, and I would very much like it if you were not." Andre felt it, the way you always feel that kind of attention, like a hand on the back of your neck. He noticed Bryce straightening every time Garrett murmured something to him. He noticed a young woman behind the concierge desk, name tag Priya, who had stopped pretending to sort her paperwork and was watching the whole thing with her hands very still. And he noticed that the guests in the lounge had gone quiet in that particular way. A room goes quiet when people can feel something wrong building, but are each waiting for someone braver to name it first. Andre had been in rooms like this before. Not here, never in a place he owned, but in enough other places over the course of a life to know exactly what this quiet was. It was the quiet of people who can see that something unfair is happening and have each decided for their own private reasons that it is not their job to be the one who says so. Eventually Garrett crossed the lobby toward him. He moved with the slow, deliberate stride of a man performing authority more than using it. He stopped a few feet from Andre's chair and spoke in that lowered, faux discreet voice that is built to sound considerate while still reaching the people nearby. "Sir, I've let you sit here long enough, and I'll be direct with you. The Wexford is private property. We've already told you we can't put you up tonight, and continuing to occupy our lobby after that isn't something we're going to allow. I need you to gather your things and head out." Andre looked up at him from the chair. "I'm sitting quietly with a sleeping child. I haven't even raised my voice. I haven't bothered a single guest. There's no reason in the world to ask me to leave." "I'm not asking," Garrett said. Somewhere behind him, one of the guests at the bar set down a glass. Priya's head came up at the concierge desk and then dropped again. Andre felt that old deep stillness settle into his chest, the one that was not anger, even though it lived in the same place anger did. He looked at Garrett's face one more time, at the smooth, total confidence of a man who had never once in his life seriously considered that he might be the one in the wrong. "Then go ahead and call security," Andre said. "I want this done properly. I want it official." Garrett's jaw tightened. He had probably expected the man to crumble, to mumble an apology and shuffle out into the rain. Instead, he turned and gave a short nod toward the far side of the lobby, where two security officers had clearly been waiting on exactly that signal. They were both big men, and they moved with the unhurried weight of people who did this kind of thing more often than they should have to. They came over and took up positions on each side of Andre's chair in a way they had obviously done plenty of times before. And that was the exact moment Naomi woke all the way up. She came back to the world the way little kids do, not slowly, but all at once, blinking, instantly alert. She took in the bright lobby and the two enormous men standing over her and the tightness in her father's shoulders and the cold look on Garrett's face, all of it in one quick sweep. She sat up straighter against Andre's arm and pulled Marbles tight against her chest, and she looked up at the two security guards with the open, unguarded stare of a child who has not yet been taught to pretend she doesn't notice things. Then she looked at Garrett, and in a clear, careful voice that carried much farther across that quiet lobby than she meant it to, she asked, "Are we in trouble?" Garrett did not answer her. He looked at Andre instead, which was its own kind of answer, and Naomi caught that too. Her small face worked through it for a second, the way she worked through anything she took seriously, and then something occurred to her, and it was the worst possible thing, and it came straight out of the most generous corner of a 7-year-old's heart. She thought it was about money. She decided, in that instant, that the reason these men did not want them here, the reason the big men were standing over them and her dad's voice had gone so quiet, was that they could not pay. And she had a solution for that. She wriggled around in the chair, unzipped the front pocket of her little backpack, the same pocket with the crushed yellow flour in it, and pulled out a small, soft wad of money. It was her allowance, a few crumpled single-dollar bills and a couple of quarters, the savings of a kid who got $1 a week for feeding the dog and making her bed. She held it up toward Garrett in her open hand, the bills wrinkled and warm from being carried around, and she said, in a voice that was trying so hard to be brave and helpful, "We have money. See? You can have mine. Please don't make us leave. It's raining really hard outside." The whole lobby stopped breathing. The man at the bar set his drink down for good. The woman by the window put her hand over her mouth. Priya, at the concierge desk, looked like she had been struck. Even one of the security guards, the younger one on Andre's left, shifted his weight and dropped his eyes to the floor, like he suddenly could not stand to be where he was standing. A small girl holding up a fistful of crumpled dollar bills, offering a stranger her entire savings so her father would not have to take her back out into the storm. It went through that room like a blade. Andre closed his eyes for 1 second. Just one. When he opened them, he reached over and gently folded his daughter's small fingers back around her money, and he held her hand closed in both of his. "Put that away, baby," he said softly. His voice was steady and warm, the voice he always used when he needed her to know that whatever was wrong, it was not her fault and never could be. "You keep your money. You hear me? This was never about money. Not for 1 second. You didn't do anything wrong, and neither did I." She looked up at him with her eyes shining and nodded, even though she clearly did not fully understand, and she tucked the bills back into her backpack with both hands. Andre lifted his head and looked at Garrett. By now there were phones out around the lobby. Nobody was being obvious about it, nobody was holding them up like at a concert, but they were there, angled quietly in his direction, catching the shape of the whole thing. A man in a wet canvas jacket, his little girl with her stuffed fox, and her crushed flour, and her offered-up dollars. 2 security guards, a manager whose face had already written the ending. People had seen enough to know which way the wind was blowing in that room, and the wind was not blowing toward the manager. Garrett's certainty had taken its first real hit. He had not planned on a child. He had not planned on a little girl emptying out her piggy bank in the middle of his lobby with the whole room watching. It had pulled the floor out from under the version of events he had been so sure of, and the way a certain kind of man reacts to losing his footing is to grab harder for it. He hardened up. He turned to the guards. "That's enough of this," he said, all the false politeness gone out of him now. "Get them out." The guard on the left took a step forward. He did not look like his heart was in it. Andre stood up, slow and careful, keeping Naomi tucked against his side, her hand still in his. He did not raise his voice. He did not pull away from the guards or push back at them. But he did not walk toward the door either. He stood there in the middle of the lobby he had built, holding his daughter's hand, and he looked at Garrett Pruitt, with the expression of a man who has finally seen everything he came to see and is now quietly deciding what he is going to do about it. And that was when the front doors opened one more time, and an old man came in out of the rain. His name was Walter Ross, and he had worked the door at the Wexford since the week it opened. He was past 60 now, a little stooped, with gray at his temples and a heavy black umbrella in one hand that he was shaking out as he stepped inside. He had been out helping an elderly couple to their car in the downpour, which was the kind of thing Walter did without being asked, because in 20-odd years of standing at that door he had decided a long time ago that his job was to take care of people, no matter what they were wearing or how much they tipped. Walter looked up from his umbrella, and his eyes landed on the scene in the middle of the lobby. The two guards, the manager, the man standing his ground with a little girl pressed to his side. And Walter went completely still. He knew that face. He had shaken that man's hand the day this building opened. He had stood next to him on the loading dock at 2 in the morning more than once, back in the early years, when Andre used to wander the property after hours and talk to the night staff, because he said they saw the real version of a place that the day people never did. Walter had brought him bad gas station coffee on those nights, and they had talked about Walter's grandkids and the leak in the east stairwell. Walter let the umbrella fall against the wall. He took 2 steps forward and said, in a voice loud enough to carry across the whole frozen lobby, "Mr. Caldwell?" The name dropped into that room like a stone into a still pond. Garrett turned. Bryce, at the desk, went pale. Priya's mouth opened slightly. Walter was already crossing the floor toward Andre, and his face had gone from confusion to something close to horror as he put the pieces together: the soaked jacket, the late hour, the guards, the manager. "Mr. Caldwell, my God, I just walked in." He stopped in front of Andre and looked at the 2 security officers and then at Garrett, and his voice rose. "Do you know who this is?" Garrett's mouth moved, but nothing came out at first. "Walter," he said finally, "I think you've got the wrong. This gentleman was just leaving." "The wrong man?" Walter turned to face the room, and there was an old anger in him now, the clean kind, the kind that has been waiting a long time. "This is Andre Caldwell. He owns this hotel. He owns this whole company. He's the reason you and I both have a job. And you've got security standing over his little girl. You could have heard a pin drop on that stone floor." Andre let it land. He let the room sit with it for one full breath. Then he looked at Walter and gave him a small, tired nod. "It's all right, Walter. Thank you." He turned to the rest of the lobby, to the guests with their phones half raised, and the guards who had gone rigid, and the manager whose entire face had come apart, and he said quietly, "He's right. My name is Andre Caldwell. I built this place. The chairs you're sitting in, the uniforms these folks are wearing, the contract that decides whether they work here tomorrow, all of it has my name on it." Naomi was looking up at him, and then up at Walter, and then back at her father, her forehead crinkled in concentration. "Daddy," she whispered, just for him, "do you know him? The nice man with the umbrella?" And for the first time since they had walked in out of the rain, something in Andre's face softened all the way through. He looked down at her and put his arm around her shoulders and pulled her in close. "Yeah, baby," he said. "I've known him a long time. He's a good man." Then he turned back to the front desk, and the warmth went out of his voice, not into anger, but into something steadier and harder than anger. And he set about doing the thing he had come, without knowing it, all this way to do. Nobody moved. That was the thing he would remember most about the minute after Walter spoke. The total stillness of a room that, 60 seconds earlier, had been building toward something loud and ugly and certain. Garrett stood frozen in the middle of the floor. Bryce had both hands flat on the counter, like he needed it to keep standing. The 2 security guards had stepped back without being told to, putting distance between themselves and a situation that had just changed shape entirely under their feet. Andre walked back toward the desk, slow, with Naomi's hand in his, giving everyone time to feel exactly where this was going. Garrett found his voice, which was either brave or foolish and was probably a little of both. "Mr. Caldwell, please, let me explain. I had no idea who you were. If I'd had any idea, I would never have. I mean, the policy, the way the night shift handles unverified walk-ins. It's all about protecting our guests, and I was going off what Bryce told me, and—" Every sentence started strong and ran out of road before it reached the end. He was not technically lying. He really had not known. But Andre had spent 30 years learning the difference between not knowing and not being responsible, and somewhere underneath all the scrambling, Garrett understood that difference too, which was why not one of his sentences could find a place to stop. Andre let him run all the way out. He did not interrupt. He did not give him anything to push against. He just waited until the words ran dry, and then he spoke, and his voice carried across the lobby without him having to raise it, because the whole room had gone so quiet that quiet was all it took. "You're right," Andre said. "You had no idea who I was. And I want you to really hear me, because that is the entire point. Every single thing you did tonight, you did because you looked at me, a tired man in a wet jacket holding a sleeping kid, and you decided in about 2 seconds that I wasn't worth the standard. Not because of anything I said, not because of anything I did, because of what I looked like when I walked in out of the rain." He paused. "And you did all of it with my 7-year-old standing right here watching. You put security over a little girl. You made her think she'd done something wrong. You made her offer you her allowance so I wouldn't have to take her back out into a storm. That happened in my building, with my name on the door." Garrett opened his mouth one more time. Andre held up a hand, gently, and he kept his voice level. "When I was about her age," Andre said, nodding down at Naomi, "my mother cleaned hotel rooms for a living. There was a stretch where we didn't have a steady place to stay. One night in the rain, she walked into a motel to ask for a room, and a man behind a desk looked her up and down and shook his head before she even finished her sentence. We slept in the car that night. She gave me her coat. She stayed up so I could sleep, and she never once let me see her cry about it." The lobby was dead silent. "I built this company because I decided that was never going to be the way it worked anywhere I had a say. The person who walks up to your desk gets a little dignity before they've proven one single thing to you, before you check their clothes, before you decide whether they look like they belong, before any of that. That is not a perk we offer. That is the whole thing. That is what the Wexford is supposed to be." He looked at Garrett. "You didn't just turn away one tired customer tonight. You turned away every person who's ever walked through a door like this one and been made to feel like they didn't count. And you taught my little girl for about 10 minutes that she was one of them." He let that sit. "Garrett, you're done. Effective. Right now. Tonight." Garrett's face went gray and inward. Whatever argument he had left, he looked at the room, at the phones, at Walter, at the little girl, and he chose to keep it to himself. He reached up and straightened his suit jacket once, the small automatic gesture of a man trying to hold on to the last unbroken piece of his pride, and he walked off in the direction of the back office, not saying another thing. Andre turned to the desk, to Bryce, who had not taken what looked like a full breath in several minutes. The young man's jaw was tight and his eyes were too bright, and he had the look of someone working very hard not to come apart. Andre stopped at the counter and looked at him directly. He was not gentle, but he was not cruel either. "You started this," Andre said. "Before Garrett, before security, before any of it. A man and a child walked up to your desk asking for a room on a night like this, and you looked at the jacket and the sneakers and you decided we weren't the right fit. And then a stranger walked in 3 minutes later. No reservation, soaking wet, just like me, and you couldn't do enough for him. The only difference between those two men was what you assumed when you looked at us. Bryce's eyes had gone wet. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm so sorry. I believe that you're sorry right now," Andre said. "I do. But sorry is what comes after you find out who somebody is. I needed you to be decent before you knew. That was the whole job. You don't get to keep a job at the front door of my company if the kindness only comes out once you've checked whether the person can hurt you. That's not what the door is for." He paused, and for a moment the hardness in him gave way to something more tired than angry. "You're done here too. I'm sorry it has to be this way for someone as young as you, but this is the one thing I will not bend on, and it has to mean something, or it means nothing at all." Bryce nodded, and a tear slipped down, and he wiped it away fast and stepped back from the counter. Two people had lost their jobs inside of a few minutes, on the spot, with the whole lobby watching, and not one person in that room thought it was unfair. Andre turned to the two security officers. The younger one, the one who had dropped his eyes when Naomi held up her money, looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "You two were doing the job you were told to do," Andre said. "I'm not going to take your livelihoods for following a manager's instruction, but I want you to remember this feeling, both of you. The next time someone in a suit tells you to stand over a tired man and his kid and push them out into the rain, I want you to remember tonight, and I want you to ask yourself whether the order is worth what it's costing the person on the other end of it. You always get to ask that question. Don't ever forget that you do." The younger guard swallowed and nodded. The older one said quietly, "Yes, sir." Then Andre walked over to where Walter was still standing, the old doorman who had come in from the rain and changed the whole night with one word. "Walter," he said, "Mr. Caldwell, you walked in here soaked from helping a couple to their car, and the first thing you did was the right thing when nobody else in this room would," Andre said. "You've been doing the right thing at that door for 20 years, no matter who was watching. That's not something I can teach. I've been trying to hire it for a decade." Walter started to wave it off the way men of a certain age do, but Andre stopped him. "I want you to take over training for the front of house," Andre said. "Not the procedures. They've got people for procedures. I want you to teach new hires what the door is actually for. I want every single person we put behind that desk to learn how to treat people from you. You'll be paid like it matters. Because it does." Walter's eyes had gone glassy. He gripped Andre's hand in both of his and shook it hard, and did not trust himself to say much. "You won't be sorry," he managed. "I know," Andre said. "You never have." He looked over at the concierge desk, where Priya had stood frozen through all of it, her hands flat on the counter, her face caught somewhere between fear and relief. He crossed to her and lowered his voice so it was just for her. "You saw it," he said, "from the very start. You could tell something was off, and the way this place was run tonight, you didn't feel like you could say a word. That's not a failure in you. That's a failure in the people who built the ladder over your head. Starting tomorrow, I want you helping Walter. You've got the eyes for it. People who notice are exactly who I need standing where they can actually do something about what they see." Priya let out a long, shaky breath and nodded, and whatever she had been holding in for the last 20 minutes finally had somewhere to go. Then Andre turned and faced the rest of the lobby. The guests who were openly watching now, no pretense left. Phones lowered, just people waiting to see what he would say. "I've been building hotels for a long time," he said, "and there is exactly one thing I have never been willing to bargain on, and you all watched what happens when somebody breaks it. Anybody who comes through those doors gets treated like they matter, full stop. Not based on what they're wearing, not based on what they drove up in, not based on whether they look like they belong in a place like this. Every person, every single time. No exceptions, and no version of it where the warmth only shows up once you've figured out that the person is somebody important." He looked around the room one last time, at the warm light and the stone floor and the piano still playing softly by the bar, the floor his mother would never have been allowed to cross as anything but a woman with a mop. "If anybody who works for me can't live by that," he said, "I'd honestly rather you go work somewhere else." I don't mean that as a threat. I mean it as the simple truth of what we are. The room held the words. And then Naomi, who had stood beside him through every bit of it with Marbles tucked under one arm and the dead serious expression of a 7-year-old determined to keep up with the grown-ups, tugged once on his hand. "Daddy," she said, and her voice was small and clear in the quiet room, "do I still have to give them my money?" Something broke loose in that lobby. Not quite a laugh, but the cousin of one, the sound a roomful of people make when a long, tight thing finally lets go all at once. The woman by the window pressed her fingers to her lips and her shoulders shook. Even Walter, with his glassy eyes, let out a short, helpless breath that was half a sob and half a chuckle. Andre looked down at his daughter, at her earnest face and her crushed flour and her crumpled dollar bills, and he felt the heavy thing that had been sitting in his chest all night finally shift into something with more room in it. He crouched down so he was level with her. "No, baby," he said. "You keep every penny of that. You're going to need it. We've got a room now, the nicest one in the whole building. And tomorrow morning you and me are going to have pancakes the size of your head. How's that sound?" Naomi considered this very seriously, the way she considered most things. Then she nodded once, satisfied, tucked Marbles more firmly under her arm, and reached up to take her father's hand. Walter himself walked them to their suite that night. He carried Marbles the whole way because Naomi had decided, with the absolute authority of a tired child, that the nice man with the umbrella was now in charge of the Fox. If you've made it this far, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because the part that actually changed things came later, and it's the part most people never hear. Here is what happened after the cameras went away and the lobby emptied out, and the storm finally blew through. Andre did not let it end with 2 firings and a good night's sleep. Firing the people who did the wrong thing is the easy half. It feels like justice, and sometimes it is, but it does not by itself change a single thing about the next rainy night and the next tired person who walks up to a desk somewhere. He had run a company long enough to know that you do not fix a culture by removing 2 people. You fix it by changing what the door is for. So, in the weeks that followed, he changed it. He sat down with Walter and with Priya and with a handful of the longest-serving staff across his hotels, the housekeepers and the night auditors and the bellmen, the people who actually saw how guests got treated when nobody was putting on a show for the man in charge. And he asked them one question: what would it look like if we never did that again to anybody? They talked for hours. Andre mostly listened and took notes, which surprised some of them, because they were not used to the man whose name was on the building wanting to hear what the night shift housekeeper thought. Out of those conversations came something he called Ruth's Rule, named after his mother. The rule had a few parts, but the heart of it was simple. On any night with severe weather, no traveler who walked into a Caldwell property would be turned away into the storm because of money or because of how they looked. If the place was genuinely full, the staff were trained and authorized to call around, to arrange a ride, to find that person a warm, safe place to land, and to treat the whole thing like it was the most important task of their shift, because to that person it was. Frontline staff were given the power to do this on their own judgment, without calling a manager, without asking permission. That part mattered most to Andre. The whole disaster at the Wexford had happened because the only person in the room with a heart did not believe she was allowed to use it. Walter ran the new training himself, just like Andre asked. He did not start with the computer systems or the policies. He started by telling the story of his own first week on the door, decades back, and the story of the night a man named Caldwell walked in out of the rain and got told he didn't belong. New hires never forgot that class. Walter made sure of it. Bryce, the young clerk, did not work in hospitality again, at least not for the Caldwell group, and Andre never pretended otherwise or dressed it up as something kinder than it was. Garrett Pruitt tried through a lawyer to make a thing of his firing and got nowhere because there were about 40 phones worth of footage and a room full of people who saw it, and because everything Andre had done that night had been clean and fair and exactly within his rights as the man who owned the building. That chapter closed quietly and stayed closed. Now, here is the part Andre cared about. A little over 2 months later, on an ordinary weeknight, a family came through the doors of the Wexford out of a hard rain. 2 parents and a couple of kids, travel-worn, dressed for a long drive and not for a nice hotel. The dad in a hooded sweatshirt with a duffel bag held together by one good strap. They had the look of people who had already been told no somewhere else tonight and were bracing to be told it again. Priya was working the front of the house, and she did not let them get more than a few steps inside before she crossed the lobby to meet them. She did not look at the duffel bag. She did not look at the sweatshirt. She looked at the tired parents and the sleepy kids, and she smiled, the smile that means it, and she said, "Welcome in out of that mess. Let's get you somewhere warm." Inside of 2 minutes, the parent's shoulders had dropped about 3 inches. Inside of 5, the younger kid had handed over a soggy backpack to a bellman without a fight. Nobody asked them to prove anything. Nobody decided whether they fit. In the far corner of the lobby, a man in a jacket stood watching with a little girl beside him. Andre had come by for a scheduled visit this time, in better clothes, though Naomi had still insisted on bringing marbles. They had been standing there a few minutes, and he had not announced himself to the floor yet, because he wanted to see this first. The ordinary version of the thing. The everyday version of what he had spent his whole life trying to build. Naomi watched Priya walk the tired family toward the desk. She watched one of the kids start to grin at something Priya said. She watched the dad in the hooded sweatshirt let out a long breath, like he had been holding it since they pulled off the highway. Then she looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said, "is that how it's supposed to be?" Andre watched the family settle in. He watched the mom laugh at something for the first time all night. He watched the kid let go of the backpack. And he thought about a woman with cracked hands sitting in a cold car in the rain, telling her son it was all right. They would find somewhere. "Yeah, baby," he said. "That's exactly how it's supposed to be." Naomi thought about that with the quiet seriousness she brought to everything. Then she nodded once, tucked marbles a little tighter under her arm, and reached up to take her father's hand. They stood there together in the corner of the lobby he had built, watching it finally become the thing he had always meant it to be. Everybody is owed a little dignity before they've shown you one single thing, before they show you what they've got, before you decide whether they belong. That isn't just good business. It's just the right way to treat a person. If this one got to you, if it landed somewhere real, do me a favor and subscribe, then drop a comment about a time someone made you feel out of place, and pass this along to one person who needs to hear it tonight. I read every single one. I'll see you in the next story.